What?
Goose!
Over the Garden Wall is the best adaptation of Dante's Divine Comedy, featuring two half-brothers and a frog with cold feet running from a scary tree boy covered in the screaming faces of the damned. Confused? Allow me to explain. The Entrance of Hell. Chapter 1. The Old Gristmill. If you, like me, haven't cracked open your copy of Dante's Inferno since high school, here's the gist. The Divine Comedy, or Dante's Inferno, is a super long poem about a guy taking a tour of hell because Satan stole his girl, Beatrice. If you, also like me, have watched Over the Garden Wall an inordinate amount of time since it hit Cartoon Network in 2014, you'll know this plot also sounds eerily familiar. The Divine Comedy starts with Dante wandering aimlessly through the woods. It's in these woods that Dante meets his tour guide of Satan's playground, a Roman poet named Virgil. And just like old Dante, Greg and Wirt come across Beatrice, a girl with a classic case of bird curse who agrees to help the two brothers find their way out of the woods. Limbo. The First Ring of Hell. Chapter 2. Hard Times at the Huskinby. In the second chapter of Over the Garden Wall, Greg, Wirt, Beatrice, and their frog, who among his many names we'll call Jason Funderburker for the sake of this video, find themselves in Pottsfield, a seemingly empty town that turns out to be filled with skeletons who clearly understood the assignment. At this point in the Divine Comedy, Dante and Virgil find themselves in Limbo, the home of lost souls in the afterlife. Not bad enough for hell, not good enough for heaven. And much like Limbo, people don't tend to leave Pottsfield. So much so that Wirt's comment to the Pumpkin Girl sparks a massive commotion at the Huskinby.
Leave Pottsfield? Who wants to leave Pottsfield?
Enter Enoch. Enoch is Pottsfield's parallel to Purgatory's King Minos, the judge of the damned who resides in Limbo. While technically Minos doesn't make his Inferno debut until much later in the poem, Enoch carries many parallels to the figure, especially his serpent-like strings. These are more than just spooky Huskinby decorations, presumably serving as a reference to the king's snake that wraps around its body when sentencing the damned to a ring of hell. Lust. The Second Ring of Hell. Chapter 3. Schooltown Follies. The entirety of Schooltown Follies is centered around the concepts of love and lust, most notably manifesting through teacher Miss Langtry's obsession with that no-good, two-timing, low-down, handsome Jimmy Brown.
That loathsome Jimmy Brown is off gallivanting who knows where.
In fact, Miss Langtry is so distraught at the thought of her lover running off and meeting someone else that she sings an entire alphabet song about just how heartbroken she is.
A is for the apple that he gave to me, but I found a worm inside.
That lady's got some baggage.
Gluttony. The Third Ring of Hell. Chapter 4. Songs of the Dark Lantern.
Do you know how to make eggs from a duck? I'm hungry.
Our gang arrives at a local tavern, ready to eat and find directions as they venture towards Adelaide of the Pasture, the witch who Beatrice says will help Greg, Wirt, and Jason Funderburker find their way home.
Come on and join the Adelaide parade.
No.
After entering a tavern to get out of a gnarly thunderstorm, which is likely a reference to the endless rains that floods the Third Ring of Hell in Dante's Comedy, Greg begins carrying massive plates of food over to their table, complete with a whole turkey, bread, and what appears to be potatoes? Unfortunately sans their natural accoutrement, molasses. Just like Cacho, a resident of the circle who offers Dante and Virgil a political prophecy, the tavern keeper provides her young patrons with a few predictions on what's to come throughout their time in the land dubbed the Unknown.
Pilgrim, he who carries the dark lantern must be the beast.
Greed. The Fourth Ring of Hell. Chapter 5. Mad Love. We first begin our chapter at a lavish dinner table, where Greg and Wirt pose as the long-lost nephews of the exuberantly wealthy tea tycoon Quincy Endicott in order to pay for the ferry ride to Adelaide's. Endicott hoards so much wealth that there's rooms in his mansion he's never even stepped foot in.
Yes, the more money I make, the bigger my mansion gets, the more lost I feel.
And if you haven't guessed already, the inhabitants in this Ring of Hell and the Divine Comedy are just the greediest little gooses on this side of the afterlife. And beyond John Cleese, Quincy Endicott, amassing Scrooge levels of cash, he also implies that he earns said money in, let's say less than ethical ways.
The things these filthy hands have done to make this money!
Wrath. The Fifth Ring of Hell in the City of Dis. Chapter 6. Lullaby in Frogland. Lullaby in Frogland begins with our crew aboard a steamboat on their way to visit Adelaide. Dante begins his descent into the Fifth Ring of Hell similarly, taking a trip through the swampy marsh of Styx. Not to be confused with every Midwestern mom's favorite rock band, Styx in Dante's Inferno is where the wrathful are condemned to fight each other in mud to atone for their unreasonable anger. For some reason, this is also where emo kids end up, eternally moping under the muck for all of the afterlife. Anger comes into play in this chapter when two froggy constables realize Greg, Wirt, and co. haven't paid their fare. Why? Because Greg is a true agent of chaos.
I've got no sense. No sense at all.
Ain't that just the way? But the most literal connection between the two stories comes towards the end of the chapter, when the gang disembarks the boat into a swamp wherein all of the frogs take, adult naps in the marsh, an allusion to the marshy punishments of the river Styx. Heresy, the sixth ring of hell. Chapter 7, the ringing of the bell. Alright, fair warning. This one's a bit of a stretch. It's more of a philosophical connection than a concrete plot one, but here we go. In Inferno, Hell's sixth ring is for heretics, and all of the heretic-y things heretics do heretically. In The Unknown, A Birdless Word and Greg Meet Lorna, a teenage girl possessed by a demon of some kind. To stifle said demon, Lorna's caretaker, Auntie Whispers, aka Tim Curry, uses a bell to command Lorna to complete common everyday household tasks, like sweeping the floor, collecting barrels of mysterious black turtles, and sorting the bones of her victims. You know, your typical Saturday to-do list. It's the demon inside Lorna's unconditional compliance with the bell that could be argued as a form of idol worship, which is a form of heresy. Is that good enough for you? Cool, let's move on. Violence, the seventh ring of hell. Chapter 8, Babes in the Wood. Despite Greg's ceaseless optimism, Wirt is at his wit's end and he falls asleep below an edelwood tree, essentially giving himself to the unknown. In Inferno, this is a circle of violence, where those who died by suicide or committed acts of violence against themselves are turned into trees. Greg succumbing to the unknown is an act of self-destruction, leaving him vulnerable to the beast and the tree-transforming forces of this kiddie cartoon hell. Meanwhile, Greg is transported by a bed chariot to Cloud City, a vintage cartoon paradise simultaneously wholesome and plagued with a weird amount of violence. While the citizens of Cloud City are essentially analogs to the Munchkins in The Wizard of Oz, which is famously not a retelling of the Divine Comedy, the Old North Wind shows up to F Greg's S up. While Greg and the rowdy Rough Cloud trade blows, good prevails and Greg captures the old windbag in a bottle, putting an end to the violence and liberating the Munchkins. Angels. Mommy. Fraud, the eighth ring of hell. Chapter 9, Into the Unknown. In Dante's eyes, the sin of fraud is so horrid that it takes up not just one, but 3 rings of hell, which seems a little bit dramatic, but whatever. Fraud's layer of hell has 10 sections, aimed at punishing panderers, flatterers, simoniacs, whatever the hell that is, astrologers, grafters, hypocrites, thieves, people who gave bad advice, sensationalists, and con artists. Throughout the chapter, Wirt finds himself in a state of social myopia, convinced he's uncool and unliked and generally a loser when his peers seem to enthusiastically greet him and treat him kindly. Wirt also manages to convince himself that Sarah has no desire to be around him, despite encouraging him to join their group and visiting the graveyard to drink, PG-friendly beverages. This is less of a case of direct fraud and more of a sort of imposter syndrome. In other words, the fraud is coming from inside the house! And then after waking up, Beatrice's bluebird mother attempts to feed Wirt a spoonful of dirt, which may be a reference to the punishment for flattery, which is eating excrement for all of eternity. Yum! Treachery, the ninth ring of hell. Chapter 10, The Unknown. Despite popular misconceptions, hell is not all fire and brimstone, at least not in Dante's eyes. The final circle of hell is reserved for those who betray their benefactors. It's entirely frigid and perpetrators are permanently lodged in ice, so like the end of Titanic, but even colder. While we don't spend too much time in this layer, the treachery is hard to miss. It is here we discover the beast had tricked the woodsman from the first chapter to feed the beast's lantern. He tells the woodsman his daughter's soul resides in the lantern, when in truth, the beast's soul resides in that lantern. If that's not some devil went down to Georgia shit, I don't know what is. During the climactic final encounter with the beast, we catch a glimpse of the creature in all of his terrifying tripophobia-y glory, appearing strikingly similar to the description of Lucifer in Inferno. Just like his poetic counterpart, who Dante says has multiple faces and wings, the beast is covered in holes, I'm not making a joke there, akin to screaming mugs. While he doesn't have literal wings, old Beastie McGee sure does love to float around a whole bunch. While Dante and Virgil escape hell through the devil's body, finding themselves on the other side of Earth, Greg and Wirt manage to flee the unknown, popping out from a body of water they had presumably been trapped within this entire time. While the show's similarities to the Divine Comedy provide a logical explanation for some seemingly unsolvable mysteries, the lore of this world likely runs deeper than any of us can imagine. In other words, who knows the unknown? Probably just creator Patrick McHale and Patrick McHale alone.